A quiet but consequential shift is unfolding inside the world's second-largest economy. For the first time in more than 3 decades, the government of Xi Jinping is signaling that the era of ultra-fast expansion may be ending. What you are about to see is not simply a change in a number on a government report. It is a signal about how power, trade, and economic competition may evolve across the global system. Why would a country that once delivered double-digit growth now aim for roughly half that pace? And what does it mean for global supply chains, financial markets, and geopolitical rivalries if the economic engine that powered global manufacturing for 40 years begins to slow? The shift became clear when Chinese Premier Li Qiang presented the government's annual economic work report at the opening of the National People's Congress in Beijing. The government announced a gross domestic product growth target between 4.5% and 5% for the year. For context, China averaged nearly 10% annual growth between 1980 and 2010, an expansion that lifted hundreds of millions out of poverty and transformed the country into the world's manufacturing hub. Even after growth slowed during the 2010s, the government still targeted around 6% before the pandemic. A target around 5% therefore marks the lowest official objective since 1991. To understand why this matters, it helps to remember how China's economic model worked. Beginning in the late 1970s under Deng Xiaoping, China shifted from a closed planned economy toward export-driven industrialization. Cheap labor, large-scale infrastructure, and massive foreign investment turned coastal cities into manufacturing centers that supplied electronics, machinery, and consumer goods to the world. By the early 2000s, China had joined the World Trade Organization and rapidly expanded exports. Factories multiplied, construction boomed, and real estate became one of the largest engines of domestic growth. But that model also created structural vulnerabilities. Local governments financed infrastructure through heavy borrowing. Property developers relied on rising home prices and constant new construction. Industrial capacity expanded faster than domestic demand. Over time, these pressures accumulated. Today, the country faces 3 simultaneous constraints: a prolonged property sector slowdown, high local government debt, and weakening demographic momentum. The property sector illustrates the scale of the challenge. For 2 decades, real estate and related industries accounted for roughly 25 to 30% of China's economic activity. Developers borrowed heavily to purchase land and build vast residential complexes across rapidly growing cities. When regulators tightened credit in 2020 to control financial risks, several major developers began struggling with debt repayments. Construction slowed sharply, reducing demand for steel, cement, and labor across the economy. At the same time, China's population trends are shifting dramatically. The country of approximately 1.4 billion people has begun shrinking after decades of growth. More than 1/5 of the population is already over the age of 60, and the working age population is declining. Younger generations are increasingly postponing marriage and childbirth due to high housing costs and uncertain employment prospects. These demographic trends mean fewer workers supporting a larger retired population, placing pressure on social systems and economic productivity. External pressures are also shaping the outlook. Trade relations with the United States remain tense following tariff measures introduced during the presidency of Donald Trump. Tariffs imposed during the earlier trade war continue to affect thousands of Chinese exports, from electronics components to consumer goods. Although Chinese manufacturers have redirected shipments to other markets in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, exports to the United States have declined significantly compared with previous peaks. Despite these pressures, China still recorded a record trade surplus close to $1.2 trillion last year. This figure highlights a key paradox. The country remains a dominant exporter, yet domestic consumption remains comparatively weak. Policymakers therefore face the complex task of rebalancing the economy away from investment and exports toward household spending, a transformation that economists have discussed for more than a decade, but which has proven difficult to implement. Meanwhile, geopolitical tensions are adding new uncertainty. China's leadership must navigate a complicated international environment shaped by technological competition, supply chain shifts, and regional security disputes. Beijing has intensified investment in advanced industries such as artificial intelligence, robotics, and semiconductor manufacturing. The goal is to secure technological leadership in sectors that will define the next phase of global economic power. Defense modernization is also accelerating. The government announced a defense budget exceeding $275 billion, reflecting an increase of about 7%. This funding supports a long-term plan to modernize the military by 2035, strengthening naval, aerospace, and cyber capabilities amid tensions over the self-governed island of Taiwan, which Beijing considers part of its territory. Another layer of complexity comes from instability in the Middle East. China has developed close economic ties with Iran, purchasing discounted crude oil despite Western sanctions. Roughly 80% of Iran's oil exports flow toward Chinese buyers, although they represent only about 13% of China's total imports. More important is the strategic vulnerability of the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow maritime corridor through which roughly one-third of China's imported oil travels. Any prolonged disruption there could ripple through China's manufacturing sector and energy supply chains. Two possible futures now emerge. In one scenario, China successfully shifts its growth model toward domestic consumption and high-technology industries. Increased household spending, combined with innovation in fields such as artificial intelligence and automation, could stabilize growth around 5% for the next decade. In that case, China would remain a central pillar of the global economy while gradually moving up the technological value chain. What becomes clear is that China's new growth target is more than a routine policy adjustment. It reflects the beginning of a transition away from the economic formula that powered 4 decades of expansion. The coming years will reveal whether the country can adapt its model while preserving stability. For the rest of the world, the trajectory of China's economy will continue to influence energy markets, global trade flows, technological rivalry, and the delicate balance between cooperation and competition in international politics.